Hello and welcome to the Commander's Quarters, your Magic the Gathering source that helps you command your budget. This show and episodes like this one are possible thanks to viewers like you. If you're looking for an easy way to help support this show, make sure that you like, share, and subscribe. Also, hit that bell notification icon so you don't miss any new episodes. You can also go check out our playmats and other merchandise at thecommandersquarters.com. We also have a ton of brand new t-shirt designs in stock, so make sure you check out those as well. Another easy way to support this show is with our TCG Player affiliate links. So whether you're buying a deck or individual cards, you can use this general link right here or one in the description. And the final way that you can support this show is by supporting us directly by becoming a patron. There are many benefits to being a patron, and I truly couldn't do this without all of their support. Hey everyone, Mitch coming in from the Commander's Quarters studio. Welcome to the show. So as I've said on previous episodes, my recording setup is a bit different for this episode and probably a few going forward. So if I sound a bit different, my apologies. That being said, I will not apologize for being excited about Megazord. Okay, the actual name is Mech Titan Core, but come on, it's Megazord, and it very well might be the coolest card ever, so make sure you check that episode out at some point. Also from this morning, I discussed another exciting card with Nashi Moon Sage's Scion, and yeah, this is a commander that can help you cast free spells, well, free in a way, let's just say. And of course, also make sure you check out at some point my most recent episode on a really exciting saga that says, well, in some ways, to your opponents, you lose the game. But don't check those episodes out before you stay tuned to this one where I talk about Reality Heist, which is Affinity Dig Through Time? But really quick before we jump into this episode, though, a huge thank you to Eddie for sending me over this spoiler and making me aware of it, and for the great discussions, of course, on this card as well as the other cards in spoiler season. And of course, as always, if I make any mistakes on this episode, or if you don't like it for any reason, make sure you blame Eddie in the comments below. Or just blame Eddie for whatever you want. And now with that said, let's jump into it. So Reality Heist is an instant for 5 blue, but you're never going to be paying that. Well, at least for the right decks, you're not going to be paying that. It says, this spell costs 1 less to cast for each artifact you control. Now, that might sound familiar because, well, that basically is what Affinity is, but it doesn't have Affinity on the card, and we'll talk about why that is here in a bit. Regardless, it does say, look at the top 7 cards of your library. You may reveal up to 2 artifact cards from among them and put them in your hand. Put the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. So this card is kind of like a culmination of different things. First off, again, that very first part, that cost reduction for artifacts, is essentially exactly what Affinity is. And I'm pretty sure actually the Affinity keyword is just that. Now, when it comes to why it doesn't actually just say Affinity and, save card space because of the amount of text that's already on it, the reason is probably pretty simple. When it comes to standard sets, they do try to limit the number of, mechanics, or new mechanics in it at least, or even returning mechanics, so that newer players, might not get confused when we have a lot of different mechanics in the same set. So when they're adding new things like reconfigure, as well as, channel, actually, which is a returning mechanic, they don't want to just keep piling on the mechanic keywords that people have to remember. Now, if Affinity was going to be a main returning mechanic of this set, then that would be a different story. However, well, for many reasons, Affinity is definitely not going to be a main returning mechanic of this set. Okay, at least I should say, I would assume not. We've seen a good amount of spoilers so far, and this is the very first one that has this text on it. So I'm thinking we're not going to be seeing any more of these Affinity type cards, but I could be wrong on that. Regardless, when it comes to the card itself, that is a fantastic amount of value. Again, for a deck that is built around artifacts, this essentially is going to cost you, blue, 2 mana for an instant speed spell. That is going to let you look at the top 7 cards of your library and get up to 2 artifact cards from among them right into your hand. So yeah, it's kind of like a curated pay to, draw to at instant speed, but yeah, getting you the best of the top 7 cards of your library, when it comes to the best, artifact options that you have. So again, obviously this card is not for every single kind of deck out there. In fact, it's really not for decks that aren't heavy into artifacts because, number one, paying 7 mana to get 2 cards off the top 7 is not great. In fact, I'd say it's pretty bad. And on top of that, again, if you don't have enough artifacts in your deck, you are probably going to whiff quite a bit on this. I mean, even though you might hit 1, there are some times where you could even hit 0 artifacts off the top, and that would just be a pretty terrible way to spend 7 mana. or actually even any amount of mana. But again, for the right deck, an artifact-centric deck that runs a good amount of artifacts, you are going to get a ton of value out of this pretty much every single time. Obviously, it's not guaranteed to cost 2 mana, but again, the low end is 2 mana, which is really fantastic, and even if it just cost a couple mana more than that, it's still going to be worth it for that instant speed, hey, go get 2 things off the top of your library that can really help you out. So this card can do a ton of work for the right deck, and again, like I mentioned before, it's kind of reminiscent of a previous card that is very powerful in a lot of formats. And that previous card is of course Dig Through Time, an instant for 6 blue, and it has Delve. So again, instant speed costing, well, this one costs 8 mana versus the other one is 7, but still there is a way to reduce the cost of it. Again, Delve says each card you exile from your graveyard while casting this pays for 1. So again, this has the potential to just cost blue, again the exact same amount as our new card, and again the effect is incredible. Look at the top 7 cards of your library, put 2 of them into your hand, and the rest on the bottom of your library in any order. So this does not have that same restriction of only getting you artifacts, but again, our new card is more of an artifact-specific card anyways. So where Dig Through Time rewards you for getting cards into your graveyard, maybe that's a mill strategy or a spellslinger strategy, so that you can delve cards away so that you can actually cast this for a cheap amount. Reality Heist again is going to benefit you for having artifacts in play and get you more artifacts off the top. Now another somewhat similar card to Dig Through Time that we have seen in the past is Drawn from Dreams, which is a sorcery for 2 blue, which does the exact same thing, you know, minus it actually having that delve, and of course it being at sorcery speed. So this one is locked into 4 mana, so again there is a lower downside, but also a much lower upside, and of course it's limited as well to when you can cast it just being a sorcery, so this one is a pretty limited card when it comes to its potential. And of course, when it comes to getting cards off the top of our library at instant speed though, we have got to talk about Fact or Fiction, which is, well, an absolutely incredible card advantage spell in a lot of formats, including Commander. It's an instant for 3 and a blue, and it says reveal the top 5 cards of your library. An opponent separates those cards into 2 piles, put 1 pile in your hand and the other in your graveyard. So again, unlike Dig Through Time, there is no cost reduction on this spell, but for 4 mana, you are still getting a ton of value, and again, at instant speed. Obviously, Fact or Fiction and Dig Through Time are much more applicable to many decks out there, you know, versus Reality Heist, but Reality Heist can be incredibly impactful for those artifact-centric decks. Being instant speed and having the potential to cost just 2 mana is absolutely incredible for that kind of card advantage. Now we have seen somewhat similar card advantage spells in Affinity from the past with things like Thoughtcast, Thought Monitor, and Ethersworn Sphinx. Thoughtcast is a sorcery for 4 and a blue, and it has affinity for artifacts, so again, affinity means the spell costs 1 less cast for each artifact you control, the exact same thing as our new card, and it says draw 2 cards. So this one is at sorcery speed. It's not giving us a choice of what cards we're getting off the top, but it is helping us draw 2 cards for potentially just 1 mana. Speaking of which, Thought Monitor from Modern Horizons 2 is very similar. It's a 2/2 construct that costs 6 and a blue, and it has affinity for artifacts, flying, and when it enters the battlefield, draw 2 cards. So obviously this one costs an additional 2 mana on top of Thoughtcast, but you're also getting, you know, a 2/2 flyer in addition to that, and it comes on an ETB, which you can abuse in some ways. And again, it definitely has the potential to be cast for the exact same amount. Again, in artifact-centric decks, you can get out a ton of artifacts to reduce the cost of these down to their lowest point. Speaking of which, Ethersworn Sphinx is another card advantage affinity spell. It's a 4/4 Sphinx that costs 7 white, blue, and it's got affinity for artifacts, flying, and cascade. So with this one, you don't know what you're going to be hitting off the top, you know, unless you build an entire deck around that, but still, you can get some value out of this by being able to cast something off the top of your library that you hit that's going to cost 8 or less. Now, these cards definitely see play in the right decks, and I definitely think that, you know, Reality Heist is going to see a good amount of play as well. Again, these other card advantage spells that have affinity essentially are, you know, sorcery speed spells, whereas our new one is an instant, and again, it's got that Dig Through Time kind of flavor, so I think it's going to be very impactful for the right decks. Now again, affinity is something that we rarely see, and we'll talk about probably exactly why here in a bit, but I mean, the most recent time that we saw it was Modern Horizons 2, where we saw it on cards like Sojourner's Companion, which is just a 4/4 Salamander, you know, for 7 mana, but it's got affinity for artifacts, so in the right deck, you could basically just cast this 4/4 for free. Oh, and on top of that, it's got artifact land cycling, which can be pretty great as well. So again, this affinity card was printed right into Modern, you know, being a Modern Horizons 2 card, so it skips Standard because, yeah, I don't think Wizards is looking to truly bring affinity back in Standard anytime soon. And again, although this card might not look like much on the surface, keep in mind that this card is banned in Pauper, and yeah, Pauper can be a very powerful format as well. Now, if we go back to Throne of Eldraine, which I believe was at the end of 2019, we actually do see the exact same text. This spell costs 1 less to cast for each artifact you control on Emery, Lurker of the Loch. So as you can see again, Wizards essentially said, hey, here is an Affinity card. We're not going to put Affinity on it because that's not going to be a main theme of this set or a main mechanic of this set. And again, there are plenty of reasons why. And previous to that, the only other time that we saw Affinity mentioned was on Tezzeret Master of the Bridge from War of the Spark, where it said, creatures and planeswalker spells you cast have Affinity for artifacts. So obviously Tezzeret itself doesn't have Affinity, but it basically gives all your other things Affinity when it's in play, and yeah, I mean that can lead to some very broken plays. And speaking of broken, now the reason that we're probably never going to see Affinity back in a big way in Standard, outside of just being on essentially one card, is because of the impact that it had to the Standard format way back, I believe, during the Mirrodin block. And at the time, I believe it was a record number of bannings with 8 cards banned in total because of the Affinity decks that were running around. And the 8 cards that were banned, actually, none of them mention Affinity, but they all work really well with Affinity with cards like Arcbound Ravager, Seed of the Synod, and all the other artifact lands, which there are 6 of them, and Disciple of the Vault. So though technically no cards with Affinity were banned, the cards that were causing problems with Affinity were banned. Because a cost reduction keyword like Affinity is an incredibly powerful thing, and Wizards, well, is learning to be careful with those kinds of things. So yeah, although we do see, this Reality Heist card, which is very exciting, for those of you wondering why Affinity isn't on the card, it's probably because we're not going to be seeing any other Affinity type cards in this entire set, and we might not see another one for quite some time. That being said, one interesting thing that I want to point out that Eddie actually sent over that I believe a judge posted on Reddit, so thank you to whoever that was. When it comes to how Affinity actually works and actually works with the rules of Magic, and specifically with something like, say, treasures, there's a pretty unique thing that you can do. Since you actually are going to lock in the cost of the card before you pay it, so again, Reality Heist is what, 5 blue, if you have just, say, 4 treasures in play when you cast this, you can basically announce and say, hey, the cost of this card is 1 blue. You lock that in, and that's because you control those 4 treasures. But then you can still sacrifice 3 of those treasures to help pay for the card to cast it. Sacrificing the treasures and actually losing them doesn't affect how much that card is going to cost because you locked in the cost at the time of announcing it. So again, just something that's an interesting interaction that I want to make sure I point out because, well, I found it interesting and I'm sure it's going to come up in a good amount of games. So again, a big thank you to that judge who posted that, and again, a big thank you to Eddie for sharing that. That being said, when it comes to decks that are going to want Reality Heist, well, there are going to be quite a few of them out there, so I'll just name a few. I mean, Master Thopterus is a fantastic artifact-centric commander that can get a ton of artifacts in play very quickly. He has, whenever you cast an artifact spell, create a 1/1 colorless Thopter artifact creature token with flying. So essentially, hey, if you play an artifact, you're not only getting that artifact, but another one. So obviously they can help you flood your field very quickly with artifacts to help build up your affinity for artifacts, and then something like Reality Heist can cost just, 2 mana very easily, go get you 2 more artifacts to get you more Thopters. So yeah, there's a lot of potential for that card in this kind of a deck. Speaking of which, let's move on to a commander that takes artifacts in a different direction with Dalakos, Crafter of Wonders. Dalakos can tap for colorless, but you can only spend this mana to cast artifact spells or activate abilities of artifacts, but luckily for you, you are heavily incentivized to play a lot of artifacts in this deck because equipped creatures you control have flying and haste. So get a bunch of equipment out and then suit up your creatures, and yeah, again, maybe go get some more cards off the top of your library, maybe more artifact creatures or more equipment. Reality Heist just overall can provide you a lot of value for not a lot of cost. And speaking of a lot of value, I mean, okay, I guess I could go through pretty much every artifact-centric commander out there that has blue in it and be like, hey, you might want to consider this high-value card, but I'll just stop here. Even an Urza deck might want to utilize that card. I mean, obviously, depending on how powerful you build your Urza deck, but yeah, your Urza deck is going to have a good amount of artifacts in it, and those artifacts, of course, because of Urza, can tap an untapped artifact you control to add blue, so your artifacts can actually help you cast a spell that's going to help you get more artifacts that can get you even more mana. So yeah, Urza is a pretty powerful commander. But now that this episode is coming to a close, it's time for me to wrap things up and give you my final thoughts on Reality Heist. This Affinity Dig Through Time artifact-centric card is going to be fantastic for the right kinds of decks out there. Again, if you've got a deck that's got a ton of artifacts in it, not only are they going to help reduce the cost of this card, but this is also going to help you get even more of them into your hand, and again, at instant speed for potentially just 2 mana. I think this card has a ton of potential, and many Magic players out there are going to be very excited to see it. And again, on top of that, I think that the fact that, Affinity was not keyworded on this card just shows how powerful Affinity was at the time, and how powerful it could still be, and how, well, because of that, I highly doubt we're going to see any more Affinity type cards in this set, and we might not see Affinity again for quite a while. That being said, I'm sure we're going to be seeing other exciting things in this set, so make sure you're staying tuned to this channel for more exciting spoilers and quick takes. And with that, the show has come to a close, so it's my turn to hear from you. So in the comments below, let me know what your thoughts on this episode are, and as always, thank you again, and have a good one.